Hi, I'm Kat, and today I have for you a true crime case, also a word in Romanian, and I'll also be doing my makeup at the same time. So let's start with the easiest and the quickest, which is the word in Romanian. Actually, it's two words, but basically means one thing only. So, okay, the word is asistent medical. Asistent medical. Assistent medical. Well done, guys, you just said nurse. For 16 years, Charles Cullen was employed as a nurse throughout various hospitals in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, United States. Over that time, he slipped deadly overdoses of drugs into his patients' IVs. It's speculated that Charles could have killed up to 400 patients, which would make him one of the world's most prolific serial killers, earning him the nickname of the Angel of Death. Throughout his 16-year medical career, Charles moved between different hospitals and nursing homes throughout New Jersey and Pennsylvania, but this wasn't for his desire to help patients. No, he was actually killing them and then running away before anyone caught on. Charles Edmund Cullen had quite a troubled childhood, and he lost several family members throughout his youth. He was born on February 22nd, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey. He was raised in a working-class Catholic family, being the youngest of 8 children. His father, Edmund, who was a bus driver, died on September 17, 1960, when Charles was only 7 months old. Charles would later describe his childhood as miserable and claim to have been constantly bullied by his schoolmates and sister's boyfriends. When he was 9 years old, he tried for the first time to kill himself, one of many attempts throughout his life. He first tried to end his life by drinking chemicals from a chemistry set. Charles's mother, Florence Cullen, was born in England, and she emigrated to the US after World War II. She was killed in a car accident on December the 6th, 1977, at the age of 55, when Charles was in his senior year of high school. To Charles, the loss of his mother was just devastating, and he was really upset that the hospital didn't inform him immediately of her death and cremated her body instead of returning it, which I think will play a significant role in his crimes later on. 2 of his siblings also died not long after. For many years, he cared for his brother, who sadly lost a battle with cancer. In 1978, Charles dropped out of high school and he enlisted in the United States Navy, where he served aboard the submarine USS Woodrow Wilson. He passed basic training and the difficult psychological examinations required for submarine crews, who were expected to spend as long as 2 months at a time being submerged in a cramped vessel. He rose to the rank of Petty Officer Second Class as part of the team that operated the vessel's Poseidon missiles. But Charles didn't really fit in during his time in the Navy, and just like in school, he was bullied yet again by his fellow crewmen. 1 year into his service, Charles's leading petty officer aboard Woodrow Wilson found Charles sitting at the missile controls with a surgical mask on, gloves and scrubs, instead of being in his uniform. He was disciplined for that, but Charles never explained why he was dressed the way that he was. The Navy reassigned him to a lower pressure job on the supply ship USS Canopus. There, he tried to kill himself, which led to him being committed to the Navy psychiatric ward several times over the next few years. But in 1984, Charles received a medical discharge from the Navy for undisclosed reasons. Soon after his discharge, he enrolled at Mountainside Hospital's nursing school in Montclair, New Jersey, where he did quite well. He was elected president of his nursing class, and then he graduated in 1986, after which he started working at the burnt unit of St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. During this time, Charles met and married Adrienne Baum in 1987. Their daughter, the first of two girls, was born later that year. However, Charles's wife became increasingly concerned at his unusual behavior and also his abuse of the family dogs, which is a red flag, if I might add. In January 1993, she filed for divorce. She contacted the police, informing them that she was afraid of her husband, and she also filed a restraining order against him. In the complaints filed by her, she detailed a series of incidents that took place at their home. Charles stuffed their pet ferret into a trash can, burned one of his daughter's books in the fireplace, and on one occasion dropped his daughters off with a babysitter and didn't pick them up for a week. According to Adrienne, she was forced to get rid of the family's pets because she believed Charles would kill them. She also claimed that Charles spiked people's drinks with lighter fluid, and he once called a local funeral home to inquire about their rates. Of course that, Charles, he actually denied these claims, saying that his wife was exaggerating, but was she really? Anyway, she insisted that Charles was mentally ill. She was also really scared that he might endanger her and their two children, especially because by this point Charles had access to drugs at the hospital that he worked at. She said that before the bizarre incidents, Charles never acted this way. Adrienne attempted to get a restraining order against Charles, but the judge denied the request, stating that he was guilty of only odd behavior, not threatening violence. In the wake of the divorce, Charles's life began to spiral out of control. He turned to alcohol to cope, and he fought desperately to get custody of his two daughters, but with no success. He tried to kill himself several times, the first of which came just days after Adrienne made domestic violence complaints, and he battled with mounting financial problems and also mental illness. Just 2 months after Adrienne filed for divorce, Charles broke into the home of Michelle Tomlinson, a nurse. After this incident, Adrienne would be granted a restraining order against Charles. We'll get into more details about this in a minute. It seems that this is the culmination that sends Charles over the edge. We are seeing his behavior changing dramatically, with him abusing animals, spiking drinks, clearly struggling. As a result, it escalates to the worst possible level. Later that year, after the divorce, Charles killed 3 of his patients at Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, and shortly after, Charles resigned from this hospital. So now we get to see the pattern clearly. He strikes, flees, and tries again. So let's just get into the timeline. Charles moved to Hunterdon Medical Center in Flemington, New Jersey, where he worked mostly on night shifts. Over the next 9 years, he changed hospitals across New Jersey, killing patients along the way. In some cases, he was fired, and in other cases, he left and moved elsewhere. Because of faults in the regulatory system, which didn't allow sharing information between hospitals, combined with a silent death that comes with poisoning in a hospital, nobody knew what was happening. Over this time, Charles tried to take his own life on several more occasions, including one attempt in 2000. We'll get into more detail later on. The first murders, to which Charles later confessed, happened at St. Barnabas Hospital. On 11th of June 1988, he administered a lethal overdose of intravenous medication to a patient. He eventually admitted to killing several other patients at St. Barnabas, including an AIDS patient who died after he was given an overdose of insulin. Charles left St. Barnabas in January 1992 when the hospital authorities began investigating the contaminated IV bags. The investigation later determined that Charles was most likely responsible, resulting in dozens of patients' deaths at the hospital. 1 month after leaving St. Barnabas, he took a job at Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, New Jersey, where he murdered 3 elderly women with overdoses of the heart medication digoxin. The victims were Lucy Mugavero, Mary Natoli, and Helen Dean. This was the same year after his divorce. Helen told family members that a sneaky male nurse injected her as she slept. However, family members and also healthcare providers at the hospital dismissed her comments as unfounded. Charles then resigned from the hospital. The pathologist stated that Helen died of cancer, and because of this, a proper investigation was not done. The following year, in 1993, Charles moved into a basement apartment in Phillipsburg after the heated divorce from his wife. He later claimed that he wanted to quit nursing in 1993, but the court-ordered child support payments forced him to continue working. In March 1993, he broke into Michelle Tomlinson's house, a nurse and his co-worker, while she and her young son slept, but he left without waking them up. He then began stalking her, which led to her filing a report against him. He pleaded guilty to trespassing and received 1 year of probation. The day after his arrest, Charles tried to kill himself again. He took 2 months off work and was treated for depression in 2 psychiatric facilities. However, he tried to kill himself 2 more times by the end of the year. That September, a 91-year-old cancer patient at Warren Hospital reported that Charles, who wasn't her assigned nurse, came into her room and injected her with a needle. She died the following day. Her son protested that her death was not natural, and the hospital administered a lie detector test to Charles and several other nurses, which he passed. He continued to work at Warren until the following spring. Charles then began a 3-year job in the intensive care unit of Hunterdon Medical Center in Flemington, New Jersey. He claimed he didn't harm anyone during the first 2 years at the medical center, but hospital records for that period were destroyed at the time of his arrest in 2003. Charles admitted to murdering 5 patients between January and September 1996, again with overdoses of digoxin. He then found work at Morristown Memorial Hospital, but he was soon fired for poor performance. He remained unemployed for 6 months and stopped making child support payments. After seeking treatment for depression in the Warren Hospital emergency room, he was briefly admitted to a psychiatric facility. In February 1998, Charles was hired by the Liberty Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where he staffed a ward of respirator-dependent patients. There, he was accused of giving patients drugs at unscheduled times. He was fired after being seen entering a patient's room with syringes in his hand, an encounter that left the patient with a broken arm. Charles caused the patient's death at Liberty Hospital, which was blamed on another nurse. After leaving Liberty, he was employed at Eastern Hospital from November 1998 to March 1999. On December the 30th, 1998, he killed yet another patient. A coroner's blood test showed lethal amounts of digoxin in the patient's blood, but an internal investigation within Eastern Hospital was inconclusive. The evidence didn't definitively point to Charles as the murderer. Even with his history of mental instability and the number of deaths during his employment at various hospitals, Charles continued to find work because of a national shortage of nurses. On top of that, there was no reporting mechanism to identify nurses with mental health or employment problems, and liability concerns made hospitals unwilling to take significant action against Charles. In March 1999, he took a job at the burn unit of Allentown's Lehigh Valley Hospital, Cedar Crest, where he killed 1 patient and tried to kill another one. 1 month later, he resigned from Lehigh Valley Hospital and took a job working in the cardiac care unit at St. Luke's Hospital in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. During the following 3 years, Charles murdered at least 5 patients and is known to have attempted to kill 2 more. On 11th of January 2000, he once again tried to kill himself by lighting a charcoal grill in his bathtub, and he hoped to die from carbon monoxide poisoning. His neighbors, however, they smelled smoke and called the fire department and also the police. Charles was taken to a hospital and a psychiatric facility, but he returned home the following day. No one suspected that Charles was murdering patients at St. Luke's until a co-worker found medication vials in a disposal bin. The drugs were not valuable outside the hospital, and since they were not used in recreational drug use, the theft was highly unusual. An investigation showed that Charles had taken the medication. At this point, he was offered a deal by St. Luke's to resign and be given a neutral recommendation or to be fired. So he resigned and was escorted from the building in June of 2002. 7 of his co-workers at St. Luke's later alerted the Lehigh County District Attorney of their suspicions that he used drugs to kill patients. Investigators never looked into Charles's past, and the case was dropped 9 months later for lack of evidence. Charles was never even interviewed. In September 2002, Charles began working in the critical care unit of the Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey. He began dating a local woman around that time, but his depression got worse. He had killed at least 13 patients and tried to kill at least one more by mid-2003 using digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine. On June 18, 2003, he unsuccessfully tried to murder Somerset patient Philip Greger, who was later discharged and died 6 months later of natural causes. Somerset began to notice Charles's wrongdoing when he accessed the rooms and computerized records of patients to whom he was not assigned. The hospital's computerized drug dispensing cabinets showed that he was requesting medication that his patients were not being prescribed. His drug requests included many orders that were immediately cancelled and many requests within minutes of each other. In July 2003, the executive director of the New Jersey Poison Information and Education System warned Somerset officials that at least 4 suspicious overdoses indicated the possibility that an employee was killing patients. The hospital denied contacting authorities until October. By then, Charles had killed at least 5 more patients and tried to kill another. When a patient in Somerset died of low blood sugar in October 2003, the hospital alerted the New Jersey State Police. That patient was Charles's final victim. State officials castigated the hospital for failing to report a non-fatal insulin overdose administered by Charles in August. An investigation into his employment history revealed past suspicions about his involvement in patients' deaths. Somerset fired Charles on October 31st, 2003, apparently for lying on his job application, but this wasn't the real reason, of course. When the officials at Somerset Medical Center noticed that a high number of patients died with high levels of digoxin in their bodies, they conducted an internal review and they found a large number of questionable lab results involving Charles's patients. After Charles was fired, the hospital officials informed prosecutors of their findings and Charles was placed under surveillance. The nurse and co-worker Amy Lauren formed a friendship with Charles, and she saw him as a kind man, someone that she wanted to spend time with and be friends with. She was a single mother and cardiomyopathy sufferer who was coping with night shifts in the New Jersey hospital in order to qualify for health insurance when Charles was hired to help manage the workload. They quickly formed a close bond. Charles even helping Amy to cover up her illness and care for her two young daughters. But following the sudden death of two patients, detectives became suspicious of Charles. When they gave Amy documents that showed the drugs Charles was ordering, she knew that he was murdering people. She told CBS at the time, quote, "There were so many withdrawals of lethal medications that you wouldn't order unless you wanted to kill someone," end of quote.
He may have been one of the most prolific serial killers in history, and he might still be taking lives if not for the work of his colleague, a nurse who worked with cops to bring the killer to justice. She spoke with Jim Murray.
She's the brave nurse who stopped the maniac who may have been America's most prolific serial killer.
He murdered people right in front of me.
Amy Lochran worked alongside Charles Cullen for a year and a half at a hospital in New Jersey. They became close friends. She never suspected anything until police confidentially showed her evidence that he was injecting patients with lethal doses of drugs.
The medications he used were brutal medications. Medications, for instance, that are paralytics, that you cannot speak, you cannot breathe, you cannot fight back, you cannot blink. You can hear everything that's happening.
Investigators asked Amy to use her friendship with Cullen to get him to confess.
Did you actually wear a wire to help get him to confess?
I did.
They suspected Cullen's murderous crime spree had begun in the late 1980s. Now Netflix has turned Nurse Amy's story into a movie, The Good Nurse. Jessica Chastain plays Amy. Eddie Redmayne plays the serial killer. It shows how she persuaded Cullen into admitting his monstrous crimes.
What do you need me to do?
Tell the truth.
Charles Cullen pleaded guilty to murdering 29 people. How many people do you suspect he actually murdered?
It's well into the hundreds of how many people he not only tried to kill, but probably did murder, around 400.
So how did this monster evade justice for so long? Amy Lochran says Cullen moved from hospital to hospital, maintaining his cover as a caring nurse. She says hospital administrators suspected he was doing terrible things, but they turned a blind eye.
My hospital was responsible for allowing Charles Cullen to work after they knew unequivocally that he was murdering people.
The movie, The Good Nurse, and a documentary about the case called Capturing the Killer Nurse are both streaming on Netflix.
So she began collecting evidence at the hospital and then alerted the police after she became alarmed about Charles's records of accessing drugs and his links to patients' deaths. She had a list of 69 patients who she believed were killed by him. Police kept Charles under surveillance for several weeks until they finished their investigation, and investigators assigned Amy to visit Charles after work hours and to talk with him while she wore a wire. Amy tried to get a confession out of Charles. Quote, "I know you did it. Let's go to the police station. We can call them together." I can't, he replied before leaving the bar. Investigators were waiting outside in the parking lot, and with the secret recording evidence, police produced enough probable cause for an arrest. Charles was arrested at a restaurant on December the 12th, 2003 and charged with 1 count of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. On December 14th, he admitted to the homicide detectives Dan Baldwin and Tim Brown that he murdered Florian Gall and attempted to murder Jin Kyung Han, both of whom were patients at Somerset. In addition, he told the detectives that he murdered as many as 40 patients over his 16-year career. In April 2004, Charles Cullen pleaded guilty before Judge Paul Armstrong in a New Jersey court to killing 13 patients and to attempting to kill 2 others by lethal injection while he was employed at Somerset. As part of his plea agreement, Charles promised to cooperate with authorities if they didn't seek the death penalty for his crimes. A month later, he pleaded guilty to the murder of 3 more patients in New Jersey. In November 2004, he pleaded guilty in an Allentown court to killing 6 patients and trying to kill 3 others. He repeatedly interrupted the proceedings by taunting the judge with the chant, "Your Honor, you need to step down." Charles Cullen was ordered to be restrained and gagged. On March the 2nd, 2006, Charles, who was 46 years old at the time, was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences by Judge Armstrong in New Jersey, and he is not eligible for parole until 10th of June 2388. Currently, he is held at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, New Jersey. On March the 10th, 2006, Charles was brought into the courtroom of Lehigh County, Pennsylvania President, the presiding judge, William Platt, for a sentencing hearing. Upset with the judge, he kept repeating, "Your Honor, you need to step down," for 30 minutes until the judge had him gagged with cloth and duct tape. Even after being gagged, Charles continued to try to repeat the phrase. In that hearing, the judge gave him an additional 6 life sentences. As part of his plea agreement, Charles has been working with law enforcement officials to identify additional victims. I think I know what Charles means when he says to the judge that he needs to step down. This is simply my opinion and observation, but it's possible that he is doing it because he considers himself a free man. You know, like free man on the land, which means that he doesn't go by the law. He's free to do whatever he wants. He goes by the common law. He can't be arrested or he can't be held responsible for anything. It has to do, you know, with the Magna Carta, the common law, the law of the land, where it says that no free man shall be seized, imprisoned, possessed, outlawed, exiled or ruined in any way, nor in any way proceeded against, except by the lawful judgment of his peers and the law of the land. To no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right or justice. So, being in the court setting, the judge is kind of sailing the ship, if you want, and he's kind of like, you know, the commander of the ship, but once he steps down, he can't command anymore. Similarly, if someone is stepping in front of the judge, that means that basically they went into the judge's territory and so they accept whatever the judge says. In my own words, you know, this is the explanation for it. Following his arrest, Charles admitted to a large number of murders, giving investigators an estimate of how many people he killed in each hospital. He was offered a plea agreement in which he avoided the death penalty in exchange for his confessions.
You realize that you're on audio tape and you are being videotaped here. We are being videotaped here. You understand that?
Yes.
You're okay with that? Okay. Charlie, what we'd like to first bring up, the first instance we'd like to bring up with you, you understand you've been charged with 2 crimes, correct?
Murder and attempted murder.
Murder and attempted murder. Do you understand or do you know who the victims of both those charges refer to?
I do now. I didn't know the second one until you told me a little while ago.
Okay, and that was a woman whose name is Miss Han?
That's correct.
Jin Han, I believe it is?
Yes.
Okay, and that was a charge of attempted murder.
That's correct.
Now, you were also charged with homicide, murder.
Yes.
And that charge is a result of the death pertaining to Florian Gal.
That's correct.
Okay. So you're clearly aware of that,
Yes,
correct?
I am.
Okay. Let's talk about the matter pertaining to Florian Gal. Are you responsible for his death?
Yes, I am.
And why is that, Charlie?
Because I injected him with a medication called digoxin.
And let me back up. Let me back up a little bit. I may have jumped the gun a little bit. Are you currently employed?
No, I am currently not employed.
Okay. Where was your last place of employment?
I was a nurse in Somerset Medical Center in Somerville, New Jersey.
What was the result or reason for your leaving Somerset Medical Center?
They had told me it was because of inaccuracies on my application when I was hired back in September or August when they had me sign an application.
Okay. while working during your employment at Somerset Medical Center, what was your primary assignment?
I was mainly in the ICU. Very occasionally I would be in the CCU, and even more rarely I'd be in the step-down IMCU.
What was your job title and description while employed at the Somerset Medical Center?
RN nights staff.
RN standing for registered nurse.
Yes.
Are you certified through the state of New Jersey as a registered nurse?
Yes, I am.
How long have you been a registered nurse, Charles?
Since June of '87, I graduated my nursing school, and I started off as a GN.
What is
graduate nurse?
Okay.
So I hadn't officially taken my boards at that time, but I had completed a course in nursing. Excuse me.
Sure.
A course in nursing, and successfully completed that, and was recommended by that school to sit for the boards, which were a couple months later in Atlantic City, New Jersey.
Okay.
And I did successfully complete that. But during that period of time while I was a GN, I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things a nurse would.
Okay.
Until I had gotten my license. So I was basically under another nurse's license and assisting with care.
As we go on with this, we're going to go back into that time, but I just wanted to lay a little groundwork of your background before we move ahead. Let's go back to Reverend Gall. Did you realize he was a Catholic priest?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And,
Well, let me just say, I knew he was a priest.
oh, okay.
Catholic priests visited him, but I wasn't sure if the Reverend was strictly a Catholic title. I mean,
Okay.
I believed he was,
Okay.
but I didn't know for sure.
Okay. I'm sorry. Do you recall when Reverend Gall was admitted to Somerset Medical Center?
No, I do not.
Did there come a point during his stay at the hospital that you yourself were his primary nurse?
When he was over in the ICU, I took care of him for a couple days in a row.
There came a point when you again came in contact with Reverend Gall, is that correct?
That's correct.
And could you explain to Detective Baldwin and I how that came about, the circumstances and why that came about?
He was in the ICU for a while, and then first, probably because the CCU census was low and the ICU census was high, he was eventually transferred over to the CCU. And then I was assigned a shift over in the CCU, and he was not my patient, but I saw him over there. He was in one of the end rooms, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
He, at that point in time, had gotten a lot worse. I believe he was both in kidney failure and liver failure. I don't think he was responsive at all, and I believe he wasn't getting sedation, which meaning that neurologically he was not responding even without being sedated. If I remember correctly, he may have been on something, but I don't believe he was.
Okay. You familiar with Reverend Gall's medication history?
In general terms, yes. Meaning I had taken care of him a couple weeks before. before, and I think I'm pretty sure that I had co-signed when his meds were transcribed onto a medication sheet, which is a procedure that nurses do when you run out of space on one medication sheet and you have to copy them on a new sheet to continue medications.
And after you withdrew the digoxin from the system under another patient's name other than Reverend Gall, correct?
Yes.
What did you do then next?
I went into the patient's room sometime later that night or morning and gave the medication to Reverend Gall.
How much digoxin did you withdraw from the Pyxis system before administering this to Reverend Gall?
I don't remember exactly going by the Pyxis entry. It said 2 amps, but it was probably more. I don't know if the count was off from the beginning, but it was probably 3 or 4 amps.
And what was your intent when you withdrew this? Why were you drawing this out?
My intent was to give it to the Reverend Gall
For what reason?
so he would pass away.
Okay. Is there any reason you selected Reverend Gall to do this for?
He was, from my understanding, terminal. His systems were failing, meaning his kidneys, his liver, and I believe neurologically he had suffered some sort of stroke, meaning he wasn't responsive. I'm not sure neurologically if that was the case, but he hadn't been responsive, whether it be medications or a stroke, for quite some time.
Why is it that you might be a little unable, or why is it so vague that you're unable to recall these incidents, these most recent incidents in Somerset?
I have suffered with most of my life, sometimes very severe depression. So a lot of things sometimes get jumbled up as far as remembering things.
Okay.
I may remember things for a few days, but after that, it just gets foggy and blurry.
Which is fine, understandable. You indicated that you suffer from depression.
Yes.
Is there any outside influence, outside voices or anything of that nature telling you to do things of this nature?
I don't.
Okay, that's just a question I have to ask, obviously.
I don't hear any voices telling me to do anything. I don't have any sort of second personality that would have done anything. Like I said, I just have, for the most of my life, suffered from periods of depression.
Okay.
While I was in the service, I was having a lot of trouble with alcohol. I drank. I had gotten a DW, and I don't know what the DUI, DWI, it's
Pretty much the same thing. They are the same thing. Just
one that's a little bit older, I guess. And needless to say, that wasn't helping, but I was trying to cope with that, with my feelings inside. And they had put me, after a rehab, they had put me on a medication called antabuse, and they told me specifically not to drink with antabuse, that it could cause fatal results. So I purposely took my antabuse and drank, but I didn't get hospitalized. I just felt very sick. Where you've been in the service for, I think it was 3 years, and then all of a sudden you realize, my God, I've got 1,000 so many days, and I can't leave. I couldn't leave. You know, I made this contract with the government. I mean, some of the people in the military, when they get close to their discharge date, start marking the calendar with how many days they have.
Right.
When you have over 900, it's not a good thing. It's just too much. I mean, I knew it was years that I had to go, and I knew that I didn't like what I was doing, and I knew that I didn't want to be there, and I didn't feel like it was getting me anywhere, you know, and just also became disenchanted with my job. My job involved nuclear weapons. And I was in when Reagan took over, and I was also disappointed that we were gonna change from mutually assured destruction or mad posture to a first strike. I remember that day. I remember thinking, my God, I don't want to be a part of this. I eventually did talk to the service people, tell them that I disagreed with striking the civilian population first, and rescinded. I told them I didn't want my security clearance, which meant I couldn't do my job anymore. So I did that, and then I was assigned as Mestex Master Arms, and finally doing cleaning in the barracks as my job. So I never really worked in my field for the past year and a half. Okay.
Retract back to where we were a little bit. That was fine. That was fine.
Just one question before we get off the subject of the Navy. I have to ask you this, since you went into so much detail about your depression during the time you were in the Navy. Did any killing occur during that time at all?
Yeah.
Okay. You never tried or attempted to kill anyone? I mean, okay.
We spoke about if any voices or anything of that nature, and you indicated no. Outside influences of any sort or type, you said no, correct? Are you currently under any medication?
No.
For any health or mental condition?
No,
Have you been under any medication?
I've been, one time I was on Paxil, and one time I was on Zoloft, which are antidepressants. The Zoloft, I didn't stay on very long.
Yes.
Just wait till you come back, so you don't have to repeat yourself.
Okay. Charlie, as you know, we do have an audio tape going side by side with our, videotape going side by side.
What I'd like to do at this point is, I want to change the tape, but I also have been going for a little while here, so I'd like to take a little break for everybody. If anybody needs to use the restroom, we have some food here, we have fresh coffee here, water, whatever we need, so why don't we just take a short break?
Okay.
And then just note the time, and then we'll pick up
Do you
again.
know anything about my kids?
Yes, and I'll tell you about that in just 1 second, as soon as we get going here.
Okay, for the record, I'm going to turn off the audio tape, and the time is now 7:53.
Charles had used a variety of medications to fatally overdose his patients, including digoxin, as I mentioned, insulin, dobutamine, nitroprusside, norepinephrine, and pavulon. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing these medications names right, but I'm doing what I can. Some of his victims survived the first overdose, leading Charles to try repeatedly and even change the lethal medications to make sure that he finishes the job. Charles admitted to going through the units at the hospital to find a potential victim. He even scanned medical charts to find patients who were in the hospital for multiple organ failure and those who had a do not resuscitate order. Charles appeared in court and he pleaded guilty to 22 murders and 3 attempted murders in New Jersey. During his time in court, he refused to look at the families of the victims, often pretending to be asleep at the defendant's table.
One day, without you even knowing it, your life will end. And what legacy will you have left behind, sir? A serial murderer, serial killer. You ruin the lives of your family, your children, and many people in this courtroom. You've bloodied and stained the medical profession. Absolutely abhorrent what you did, sir.
Your Honor, count 4 charges the defendant with the murder of Jack.
And I still can't really comprehend it. A registered nurse who was supposed to be a caretaker took the life of my brother for his own personal, selfish, and twisted gain. Charles Cullen, you are a coward. I am very brave for standing here today, but you yet cannot even look me in the eye and face me.
Charles Cullen, we are gathered here today essentially to hear from the families. You are hereby sentenced to New Jersey State Prison to 2 consecutive life sentences, which, with the application of the No Early Release Act, that is NJSA 2C:43-7.2, mandates a period of 85%, or approximately 127 and a half years of parole ineligibility.
No. All he cares about is himself and his own children. He doesn't care what he did to our children.
He finally can rest in peace.
Quote, "You don't even have the guts to look this way, do you? That's a shame," said the son of one of his victims. Charles Cullen was sentenced to 11 consecutive life terms and he later confessed to an additional 7 murders and 3 attempted murders in Pennsylvania. While only 29 murders could be confirmed, Charles claimed that he killed up to 40 people during his nursing career, which spanned over 16 years. Investigators, however, believe that the number could be much higher, possibly even around the 400 mark. Charles said he killed his victims because he tried to end their suffering and to prevent the dehumanization of his victims. But not all of his victims were terminally ill. One victim was only 21 years old and was in hospital for a routine spleen surgery. The daughter of one of his victims stated after Charles was sentenced, quote, "He was supposedly some sort of angel of mercy, ending people's suffering. Well, he should look around the courtroom," end of quote. Charles Cullen moved from facility to facility undetected, mainly because of the lack of requirements to report suspicious behavior by medical workers and the inadequate legal obligations and employers. New Jersey and Pennsylvania, like most other states, required healthcare facilities to report suspicious deaths only in the most egregious cases, and the penalties for failing to report incidents were minor. Also, many states didn't give investigators the legal authority to discover workers' previous employers. Employers feared investigating incidents or giving a bad employment reference for fear of such actions triggering lawsuits. According to detectives and Charles Cullen himself, several hospitals suspected him of harming or killing patients but failed to take appropriate legal actions. After his criminal conviction, many of the hospitals at which he had worked were sued by the families of his victims. The files and settlements against the New Jersey hospitals, all of which were settled out of court, are sealed. In some cases, individual workers took it upon themselves informally to try to prevent Charles from being hired or to have him terminated. Some contacted nearby hospitals in secret or quietly spoke to their superiors to alert them not to hire Charles. When Charles took a job at Sacred Heart Hospital in Allentown in June 2001, a nurse who heard rumors about him at Eastern Hospital advised her co-workers. The nurses threatened to quit en masse if Charles was not immediately dismissed, which he was. Prompted by the Cullen case, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and 35 other states adopted new laws which encourage employers to give honest appraisals of workers' job performance and provide legal protections for reporting medical errors. The New Jersey laws in particular formed the model other states would follow. Firstly, the 2004 Patient Safety Act increased hospitals' responsibility for reporting serious preventable adverse events. The 2005 Enhancement Act, a supplement to the Patient Safety Act, required hospitals to report certain details on their employees to the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs and mandated that complaints and disciplinary records relating to patient care be kept for at least 7 years. Charles said that he administered overdose to patients to spare them from being seen going into cardiac or respiratory arrest and being listed as a code blue emergency. He told detectives that he couldn't bear to witness or to hear about attempts at saving a victim's life. He also said he gave patients overdoses so that he could end their suffering and prevent hospital staff from dehumanizing them. However, not all of his victims were terminal patients. Some of them had been expected to recover before Charles killed them. The nurse, Lynn Tester, described many of the victims as people on demand in a police interview. Instead of using common painkillers and stimulants, access to which was strictly regulated by hospitals because of their value as street drugs, Charles chose drugs such as digoxin and insulin, which had little use outside of a hospital setting and were less likely to attract attention. Investigators stated that Charles may have caused patients to suffer but didn't realize it, which kind of, contradicted his claims of wanting to save patients. Charles told investigators that although he often observed patients suffering for several days, the decision to commit each murder was performed on impulse. He also told detectives in December 2003 that he lived most of his life in a fog and he blacked out memories of murdering most of his victims. He said he couldn't remember how many he killed or why he chose them. In some cases, Charles strongly denied committing any murders at a given facility. However, after reviewing medical records, he admitted that he was involved in patients' deaths. The 2008 direct-to-video film Killer Nurse, written and directed by Uli Lommel, was loosely based on Cullen. On June 25, 2020, the British TV channel Sky Crime aired the documentary Charles Cullen, Killing for Kindness. The UK true crime producers Woodcote Media Story produced the story of the nurse who confessed to murdering up to 40 patients during his 16-year career. The film, The Good Nurse, adapted from Charles Graeber's non-fiction book, The Good Nurse, A True Story of Medicine, Madness and Murder, was released on Netflix on 26th of October 2022. Eddie Redmayne portrays Cullen and Jessica Chastain portrays co-worker Amy Lauren, a nurse who helped implicate Cullen and assisted detectives by talking with him after work hours while she wore a wire. Capturing the Killer Nurse is a 2022 documentary film about the convicted serial killer. It includes interviews with Cullen, his co-workers, detectives, and Amy Lauren, the nurse who assisted the detectives. There are interviews with family members of the victims, true crime author Charles Graeber, and audio from Cullen himself. The film also takes a look at US healthcare system, saying that profit motives of private healthcare helped Charles continue to commit his crimes without consequences. It began streaming on Netflix on 11th of November 2022. Now, talking about the Netflix documentary film, the former nurse Amy has spoken to Sky News. She says she was proud to see the film come together, although it acted as a trigger for so much of the time that she spent with Charles. She said, quote, "I was pretty terrified every day and I held that together. The things that they don't show in the film was that I was actually much more sick and I was truly terrified of leaving my two girls behind." Among the victims was Reverend Florian Gall, who had looked to be recovering well in June 2003 before he suffered a cardiac arrest and died approximately 45 minutes later. When asked how he killed Reverend Gall after his arrest, Cullen confessed to injecting him with an overdose of digoxin, a heart medication. One patient, Michael Stranko, 21 years old, was suffering from an autoimmune disease and was recovering from routine surgery to remove his spleen when Cullen took his life. Mary Stranko, whose son Michael was Cullen's youngest victim, said, quote, "My heart, it aches for my son. I walk around with a hole in my heart," end of quote. Somerset County Detective Tim Brown said, quote, "He could save a life or take a life, and in many cases he chose to take a life," end of quote. And now I want to make sure that I bring awareness and at least give you some of the names of Charles's victims, even though there are barely any photos or even, all of the names. But I feel that they deserve their names being told, because everyone everywhere is talking about Charles, and even me, in this video, I spent most of the video talking about Charles because sadly we don't have much information about his victims. And whilst Charles Cullen was believed to have murdered up to 400 victims, there is very little information about most of them. This is what we know about some of Charles's victims and when he committed his chilling crimes.
This monster didn't even know us or our son, but had the audacity to end his life.
I'd like to tell you a little bit about my mother, that you murdered. You don't even have the guts to look this way, do you?
Charles, why don't you look up at us? I'd like to show you what you did to our children. This is their dad in his coffin. How do you like that?
They ranged in age from 21 to 91. Some were critically ill. Others were ready to be discharged when Cullen injected them with drugs that would kill them.
I worked on the burn unit, so, there was a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And I didn't cope with that as well as I thought I would.
And that was the first place that you gave someone medication that caused them to die. The patient was John Yengo, a judge from New Jersey who was suffering from a severe case of sunburn until Cullen injected him with a fatal overdose of lidocaine. And Cullen continued to murder patients with virtually impunity. In 1993, prosecutors investigated Cullen for murdering 91-year-old Helen Dean. An autopsy tested for nearly 100 medications, but not the one Cullen used to kill her, a powerful drug called digoxin, or DIG for short. It was Cullen's first weapon of choice. 60-year-old Eleanor Stecker, an asthma patient, was recovering and in no pain when Cullen administered a fatal digoxin overdose. College student Michael Stranko, who suffered from an autoimmune disease, was recovering from what his parents called routine surgery to remove his spleen.
My heart, it aches for my son. It bleeds for my son.
We vividly remember Charles Cullen walking into the waiting room. He looked us right in the eye and stated how Michael was gravely ill and people don't make it. And my wife told Cullen, "That's enough. You could leave now." We are haunted by the memory of Charles Cullen coming to the waiting room to get our reaction.
By his own count, Cullen had already murdered 11 people, and he would kill at least 5 more at St. Luke's. Nurses were suspicious, there were rumors about his past, and Cullen was caught red-handed stealing lethal drugs. But instead of calling the police, St. Luke's brought in a lawyer to confront Cullen. Do you think that they knew what you were doing at St. Luke's?
I think that they had a strong suspicion.
Did you expect to get caught?
Well, I think you can say I was caught at St. Barnabas and I was caught at St. Luke's. There's no reason that I should have been a practicing nurse after that.
On June 11th, 1988, he murdered John W. Yengo Sr., who was 72 years old. On March the 9th, 1991, he murdered Lucy Vigilone Mugavero, who was 90 years old. On July 23rd, 1991, he murdered Mary Natoli, who was 85 years old. On 1st of September 1991, he murdered Helen Dean, who was 91 years old. On the 22nd of January 1996, he murdered Leroy Sean, who was 71 years old. On the 31st of May 1996, he killed 76-year-old Earl Young. On June the 9th, 1996, he killed 49-year-old Catherine A. Dext. On 24th of June 1996, he killed 66-year-old Frank Mazzacco. On July the 10th, 1996, he killed 81-year-old Jesse Aiklin. On December 31st, 1998, he killed Ottomar A. Schramm. On 31st of August 1999, he murdered 22-year-old Matthew Mattern. On February 2000, he tried to kill Stella Danielzik, who was 73 years old. On the 8th of February 2001, he attempted to kill John Gallagher, who was 90 years old. On the 22nd of June 2001, he killed 79-year-old Irene Kramp. On November the 8th, 2001, he murdered William Park, who was 72 years old. On the 28th of December 2001, he tried to murder Paul Gelgan, who was 72 years old. On the 9th of January 2002, he killed 80-year-old Samuel Spangler. On May the 5th, 2002, he killed Daniel George, who was 82 years old. On the 2nd of June 2002, he murdered Edward O'Toole, who was 76 years old. On 12th of February 2003, he killed 60-year-old Eleanor Stoker. On 23rd of February 2003, he killed 74-year-old Joyce E. Mangini. On the same day, February 23rd, 2003, he also killed 89-year-old Giacomino J. Toto. On 11th of March 2003, he murdered 83-year-old John J. Schenegger. On April the 6th, 2003, he killed Dorothea K. Hoagland, who was 80 years old. On May the 5th, 2003, he killed 66-year-old Melvin T. Simcoe. On May 15, 2003, he murdered 21-year-old Michael T. Stranko. And on June 18, 2003, he attempted to kill Philip Gregor, who was 48 years old. On the 28th of June 2003, he killed 68-year-old Reverend Florian J. Gall. On 29th of June 2003, he attempted to kill Jin Kyung Han, who was 40 years old. On 13th of July 2003, he killed 80-year-old Pasquale M. Napolitano. On August 11th, 2003, he killed 38-year-old Christopher B. Hardgrove. On the 27th of August 2003, he tried to murder 83-year-old Francis Agoda. On September 20th, 2003, he killed 70-year-old Krishnakant Upadhyay. On September 23rd, 2003, he killed James R. Strickland, who was 83 years old. On 21st of October 2003, he murdered 73 years old Edward P. Zeisig. And as you can see, these were very close together, some of them even in the same day. You can clearly see the escalation here and how out of control he really was. I do think that a lot of his murders had something to do with his own mother and the way that the hospital treated her and him when she passed away. You remember that he was not even contacted by the hospital that she had passed away, and also they cremated her without anyone asking him or sending her back home. So I think that a lot of it had to do with this. Maybe he was thinking that he's not going to let anyone else treat another person as they did his mother. Maybe, you know, in his twisted mind he believed that he's giving these victims decency. I mean, I honestly do have no idea, but it's just completely twisted. And to think that he was allowed to do this over and over again, even though he was suspected for a very long time. Just imagine how many victims could have been saved if only someone would have done something sooner. It's just horrific to think that, you know, you go to a hospital and you put all of your trust in the professionals. Basically, your life is in their hands and you should be able to trust them, right? But when you hear cases like this, how can you even trust them? How can you trust the management of the hospital that they are not allowing a killer to handle people's lives? And in my opinion, wrongdoings of staff in hospitals all over the world are still being covered by management because, you know, reputation, money, donations, sponsors, and so on. Which is sad, really, because once again, as we've seen so many times before, we prioritize money over life. Thank you guys so much for watching today's case. Please let me know what do you think in the comment section down below. If you are interested in any of the makeup that I use for today's video, all of the products are linked in the description under this video. And also I do take case suggestions, so if you have any case in particular that you want me to cover, just leave any details you have in the comments section under this video. Thank you again for watching. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!